The course that we're looking at today is a Spanish course, Spanish 231, a reading and composition class. So just a little background on what the course is and where it fits in our program. We are a community college. So this is one of the highest level Spanish courses we offer. It is after the intro and intermediate courses, so it is really an advanced Spanish course. And obviously, just by the title, you can guess what it is. It's students reading texts in Spanish. I want them discussing those texts, working on their reading comprehension skills, and then on the other flip side of that, working on their composition skills, both in grammar and style. So it's kind of a basic English 101 kind of course, but in Spanish. So that's really what students are expected to be doing. Of course, most of the students in this course are in our college's certificate in translation and interpretation. It fits into that kind of study, so most of the students that take this are working towards being translators and interpreters. So I decided to put this course online. It is a fully online course this spring. And the thought behind that, for one thing, is an enrollment issue. It's a required course for the certificate program, and we only offer it once a year. So for a student who can't meet at that particular time, if it's a regular face-to-face course, that puts them back a whole year. So we decided to try it online so we could deal with that enrollment issue and timing. And then on the other side of that, it's kind of a test course for me to look at putting more language courses online. So I did decide to put this online, and these are my initial challenges in designing this course. When I say content tendency, this is a reading and writing course. And doing that online without being face-to-face at any point, there's a tendency to, I can just in my own room and never talk to anyone else, read a book, and then answer some questions about it, or I can write whatever you tell me to write without ever really interacting with other students. In general, if you sit down to read a paper, you're probably just sitting down in your home in a nice quiet place to read the paper. You're not necessarily engaging with other people in that. So the course itself can lead to just very solitary work. And that's not what I wanted for this. I really wanted to recreate the discussion aspect of the course, but in the online space. So that was one of the big challenges. The next thing is the varying language skills. As this course is part of our certificate in translation, many of the students in the course are native speakers of Spanish or heritage speakers, meaning they've grown up speaking it, even though they may not have studied it formally. Those students are alongside the students who come through our intro and intermediate courses who've had maybe 2 years of language. So I have a classroom with someone who's had 4 semesters of Spanish sitting beside a native speaker, and how do I assess them on a fair level? Where do I put my expectations? So that was a real challenge in designing the course. And then finally, the varying technology skills. This course only being offered once a year, and being a required course for the certificate, students didn't really have a choice. They were not online by choice. They were online because that's what it was being offered, how it was being offered. And some of the students weren't, they told me personally that they weren't really ready for that experience. That was not what they would have chosen. But the good thing is they're very motivated students. So they stuck with it and they joined in. And I'm happy to say that many of them reported at the end that their technology skills were greatly improved just by the Spanish course. So I have a course that tends towards solitary work, students with very different language skills and very different technology skills. And so what I really wanted in designing the course was a way to build community. Get them talking to each other, working with each other, commenting on each other's work. And in doing that, it works towards helping each other with their language skills. So it's not just me being the person helping with everything. So I wanted to go community. I wanted it to have an individualized learning component because I have such varying levels. I can't use just one flat expectation for all of my students. I can set an expectation level, but I really had to put a lot of thought into how those rubrics are put together for my assignments, and everything I do has a detailed rubric. But a lot of thought had to go into that because what I generally find is the native speakers in this course, yes, their grammar may be wonderful, so they're working on style. They're working on, I never really have writing. Or they may be able to read Spanish, but they don't have good reading comprehension skills. There's a difference between reading the language and having good comprehension skills. So I really looked at how to value those skills in students that don't have the Spanish language part of it as developed. So before this course started, some of the best practices I've gleaned from various meetings and conferences. We do have a statewide in North Carolina NC3 UL to their conferences. The distance learning organization for the community college faculty. And talked to our English faculty who have taught online. I went to various state and national conferences just to see what people are doing and get some ideas. And these are some of the thoughts that really stuck out to me. And the first one is to plan it as an online course. This course started as a complete redesign. We've had this course on the books for years. But the course has really strayed from the stated learning objectives. So I wanted this chance to bring it back to what we said the course was supposed to be. So I started with those learning objectives and said, how can we do that online? Not, how can I do what I did in class online? Which is a different approach. I also be prepared for the learning curve. We all know that that's going to be there. So I did plan for that at the beginning of the semester, created lots of tutorials for all the different tools that we're going to be using. I also staggered the first assignment, the first graded assignment, I'll say. They did some other things all at once. The first graded assignment that I knew was going to be a little more tech heavy. Only half the class turned it in the first week, and the other half turned it in the second week. In a way that makes sense to design. So it gave me a chance to only deal with the panic of 20 students at a time versus 40. This class did have roughly 40 students. And then finally, to have a personal presence. I kept myself in the comments as much as possible. I included videos of myself explaining instructions, just checking in. So I tried to be in there as much as possible so they wouldn't wonder where I went. So at this conference, it's been interesting. When I talk about my course on campus, people usually say, so what are your students doing? And I answer the question. And here it's been interesting. The question tends to be, what tools are you using before what are you doing? Which I found kind of interesting. I just brought it up because it's an interesting shift of focus. And I think sometimes we might want to shift that focus back the other direction. Not so much let's list my tools, but let's talk about what students do and then what tools make that happen. But since people always ask me what tools are you using, here's my list. And that's why when people ask me, I'm like, well, are you trying to get away from it quickly or do you want to take it out? Some of these are things that everybody uses anyway. They're not, I listed literally everything I activated in my course. And we're going to look at some of these more detailed a little bit later. But this is what we're using. And the other question I keep getting is what version, so I'll clear that up. It's 2.9, which I actually just learned. So now, before we move any further, I'm going to ask you to do something that you may not have been asked to do today or yesterday. I want you to turn to people around you and talk. This is the classroom. So in small groups, okay? My question for you is, looking at these tools, which of these tools most fosters community in an online environment? So looking at this, think to yourself for a second, you're going to have 3 minutes, and I do have a timer. At the 1 minute warning, I'm going to pull up a poll. So for right this moment, I don't want you to vote until you've talked. Okay, so you have 2 minutes to talk and think. If you're not close to someone and you're not comfortable, maybe that's fine. I'm not grading you, but I do want you to think about it for just a couple minutes, and then we'll vote on what you think most fosters community.
But usually I would say Sakai. Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to assume. Like a cool button. Yeah, you're talking about forums or meetings. Yes, yeah. Yeah. But I know, we had a class that was testing meetings, who actually was a 3-week training involved, and they didn't have any and I thought it was really So what's rising to the top? We're talking about high bandwidth and low bandwidth scenarios. News forums, they're making with your large chat room, depending on how it's used. So usually I would say. Yeah, we're designing, right? We're the meetings. Yeah. Oh, so do we get to?
If you have a vote, and we're going to see if this works with the code earlier today, we'll start this. But if you have a vote, go ahead and log your choice or choices. So working very slowly, or this one person, oh, no, we have 3. Wow. You can, I believe. It's okay with me if you do. I don't remember if I set it up to allow that. It might not.
It's working pretty fast, actually.
Okay, so if you are continuing to vote, that's totally fine. Testing forum is coming out, meetings, or what we call meetings. whatever version you use. Lots of chat rooms have that. There's some rosters, community tool. So now my question to you, questions. You all probably had an initial gut reaction to my question of which one's the most, but did your response change as a result of your conversation? Did your initial gut feeling change?
Yes.
Yeses and nos. Yeah. Do you feel more connected to the people you were just talking to than you did before this activity?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Most likely. Okay. And what was I doing while you were doing that? Some of you know, some of you may not have noticed. What's that? We're lurking.
You checked in on
us.
us.
Lurking.
You checked in on us.
You were interacting. I did talk to you. Those who I didn't get a chance to talk to, you may not realize I did talk to the people that I went to say. So, those are all things that I do in my face-to-face classroom. Right? And that's what I want to recreate online. Okay? And so the question is how we do that. So what I, in general, try to do in my class is break those boundaries. I invite and value that student voice. I think that's an important thing. I want to move from the picture on the left to the picture on the right. In the class that you're going to see, I was not the full giver of information by any stretch. We did use a book. This book it's a little book and it had absolutely no online resources whatsoever, which is kind of nice because it allowed me to just do what I want to do with it. But in it, the students really bring to the table all the information about the author and about the text that they're reading. I didn't have to do that myself, and they found so much more than I would have had time to do on my own. So we really crowdsourced information in the course, and that gave everyone a chance to contribute. Everyone had their voice. Everyone, they responded to each other. They really did communicate in the way that I was hoping that they would. So the way that I think the important part of setting that up is really those first days of the course. At our campus, we do orientations for online classes. I did an in-person orientation the week before classes started. So I met face-to-face roughly half of my students. And then the next week I did an online orientation of meetings where I got on with, I can't remember how many there were, 12, 15 students showed up for that. And I walked through the course with them and showed them how to work the site and what we were going to do. Their first assignment was ungraded. It was a survey of skills and preferences. Or I literally just asked them about themselves. I wanted to know, how long have you been learning Spanish? Where do you think your skills are? One question I asked that I did refer back to a lot is, do you want your comments from me in English or Spanish? In general, everything in my course is in Spanish, but if I've got someone who Spanish is very limited, and I'm going to give them detailed comments in Spanish, this is that. I mentioned the tutorials, personal feedback. I was there in the blogs, giving them as much as possible. And then the homepage features. This is the picture of on the front of my course, and you'll see it if I get live. That I really stressed to my students in the orientation. So this is an online space, and think of it as this living room. We're going to meet with our coffee around the fire, and we're going to talk, and we're going to share, and we're going to help each other out. And so really setting that tone at the beginning felt like made a real difference. I asked them in their communications if they have a question, don't just email me personally if it's something that's really good at the course. Put it in the chat room, put it in forums. And they did. It took me a while to do that. Was kind of nice. And so they really did make a space where they share. This is my basic lesson structure. They have weekly lessons, which is done in the lessons tool. What's in black on the left is really the function of the course that I wanted to do. So I started with, I want my students to do this, and then let me see what I can find to do it. I wanted them to do informal writing. They had journals that they did in the blog tool. And everything that has a comment capability on Sakai, that was activated. So the blogs were open to the class, and the first one had to be open to the class. The very first blog was to introduce themselves. And I didn't want them to introduce themselves to me, it was to everybody. And so the comments feature was open, so everybody talked to everybody else in that. If the blog topic was something more personal, I taught them how to choose who could see that information, and then computers can just formal writings, the compositions, they did 2 assignments, and I did eventually be able to turn it in. I learned some plagiarism lessons in this class. Reading comprehension, they did, through testing quizzes, they would have individual comprehension questions. I did want to know if they were getting it on an individual level. I knew that. And the only thing that I had to do outside of Sakai was, for reading comprehension, I wanted them to do group work. The textbook is set up this way, and I really loved it, where when they read a text, they work in small groups, and one person is responsible for the biography, one's responsible for the historical context, one's responsible for a summary, and so forth. And so I needed space for them to do that. So that, unfortunately, had to go out to these business. And then they also did a personal goal portfolio, which is a very important part of the course too. Really where they were able to level the playing field. In their blogs early in the semester, actually the second blog that they did, so about week 3, they had to set a personal goal for the course. So they said, you know, I have trouble with accent marks, and that could be their goal for the course. It doesn't mean that was the only thing. There's a lot of discussion I thought, was that the only something I was supposed to work on this semester? But that's the goal that I want you to do. This is one defined thing that is manageable in a semester. And so we had to have a lot of back and forth in the blogs about, is this a real goal, and can you do that in a semester? And then the portfolio through student pages that has outlined, this is my goal, these are the steps I'm going to take, this is what I did, and how I reflected on it. And then the other tools, the forums, the chat, and the wiki, those were available. I did not use them as a graded tool. The Sakai wiki itself, I used as a shared resources spot. So if they found a great website that talked about this theme, they could add that to there. I will say that I love that possibility. We all know that it's a little hard to manage students with that as much as I would have. So from here, I prefer to do live. And the course itself is in Spanish, so not that you can necessarily read everything from it anyway. But just to kind of give you a sense of the course itself, this is my opening page. One thing that is always important to me, always has been since I started using Blackboard and Sakai, is to have a guidebook in front. Of course, this is going to get a little long. But I have on here, for each menu item, what am I applying there? So there's an immediate guidebook here. And I have to keep stressing to everyone that the place to start is weekly lessons. That's what happens every week. You know, the other buttons are there, but really the weekly lessons is just where you're going to find what you're supposed to do that week. And I did try to make this as organized as possible. It's funny, because looking at them every last couple of days, I see my evolution over the semester as well. And that's one thing that will still have to evolve. The lessons I felt like they were organized, but then the students didn't feel that way. But so that's some room for improvement there. And I do want to add more visual and video, audio kind of instruction. I did have a very good response. I had it after the first couple of weeks. Students were like, they were having a really hard time figuring out where to set things, even though I put literally links. Here's where you submit, just click. And so week 3, I just recorded a video of myself talking about here's what you need to do this week. And it was transformative. They just quit asking, they were fine after that. So they just needed me to say it. So that's something I want to do more often. Like this is further on in the course, so they're working on a composition. For every assignment they had, they would have a write-up of exactly, they would have a write-up of exactly what I wanted that assignment to be. They always had a detailed rubric when they got the assignment. So I wanted to make sure my students always knew what they were expecting, what I expected of them before they even started. And then they would have the link to actually submit it. I did what I could to bring in outside resources. I'm not reinventing the wheel of trying to teach writing. I found some great places. This site, I loved it. It's from TWSIA, New Mexico. And it's a wonderful resource on how to academic writing in Spanish. And I loved it. But it's big, and so I ended up making a video, a Gene video, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
My two helper IT people in the front. So I made the Gene video to show which parts of the site am I really trying to get into. And students love the site, and no one ever called me or said anything about getting lost or having difficulties with it. And I know they used it because I gave them homework on it. The portfolios, I wanted to show you what we were doing there. This is the page I was on. The one thing about the portfolio pages, remind you that my students really didn't come in with any technology skills. And I sent them to student pages where, it's relatively intuitive the process. I did tell them the only thing that I expect of you is to add text. I said anything above and beyond that is just all you. I mean, I'm happy to see it, but I'm not grading you that you're adding lots of fancy features. So it's really just about add text. This is a recreation, actually, of one of my students' work. That this is a student who was very nervous about being in the online class and just was not comfortable with using this technology. And when she did her portfolio at the end, I know highlighting is not really the most exciting thing in the world, but she did it. And she even did it was 2 parts. What you're seeing written there is really the directions, that's the outline of what you're supposed to do. And so she made some pages, and you may not, I don't know if it's default everywhere, but having the medicine button is not default. So she actually changed the options to the link. And I mean, it seems kind of simple to us who use Sakai, and also might be a great way to that. But this is a student who really, she was in my office at the end of the semester. I'm going to try this, but I don't know. And she really put together a great portfolio here. Very well organized, and since I've recreated, all the comments got lost. But the great thing about the portfolio, they started it so early in the semester and worked on it all along. I was able to chime in. I made sure that I chimed in every few weeks, check and see if they did anything. If they had started it, I would start guiding them. Add something in this section, or can you change this? So, you know, the ones who worked on it during the semester, they had all ended up good grades on it because if they responded to what I was expecting. So there really was a lot of feedback in the course. Granted, you know, that also means that I spent a lot of time doing feedback. But one thing I want to mention, we were talking about which tools, bringing back to which tools foster community is very interesting to me. I had never used the chat room before. And this was interesting stats at the end of the semester. Students preferred the chat room over the forum by far. And I think the reason why is the chat room is really where I can just walk in the room and say, hey, does anybody remember what you said about such and such? And the forum, I have to think, okay, what's my topic? Does this go with something else? And you know, there's just more steps to it. The chat room is easy. I walk in, I go to my computer, I send out my question. And they really answered each other. Usually by the time I got to see what the question was, somebody else had already answered. And they were about tech issues, they were about the actual course content. They talked about other things, which I don't mind. And then there's one group that I did stop and talk to, we were having a discussion about chat room and how we were just talking about social things as well. And they before I even said anything, they said, as long as it's with the community. As long as it's with the expected minutes. But my private email, at least they management, because they do prefer the online community conversation more than most of the emails to me were things that even come to me. And then the last thing, the student feedback. On the positive side, they really did like a lot of the feedback we had. They commented on the depth of the course. They really did connect the course to other courses, and they connected to prior learning. We were talking about reading strategies, and like, well, I don't even know about this in elementary school, but I don't think that mattered anymore. And they really did connect. And the skills that they learned between the actual course material skills and then the text skills. The negative side, I did think a lot of there were too many places to go, which I don't think that that's truly that I use too many tools. I think it goes back to the organization and communication of it. It really turns into the clarity of telling them what I expect. As much as I think I'm clear, anyone who teaches, you think you say something as clearly as possible, and somebody's going to interpret it differently. So that's why I want to add in more of the audio, telling them so they get multiple ways instead. They do miss the face-to-face interaction, and I did too, to be honest. What we were missing in one of the reading comprehension discussions was the whole group discussion. They had their small group discussions, and I chimed in and whatnot, and they were open to everyone else, but it's not the same. So in the future, I may try to build in periodic synchronous meetings. Probably can't make them mandatory, but at least something to allow for a little bit more of a full discussion to wrap up. And then, like I said, the organization, that was one of the things. And in some cases that I do know that I need to be more clear, but in some cases it was just well, they mentioned something about I shouldn't ask them to submit in the chat, submit assignments in the chat room. And that's just, there was some user development needed there. So that's kind of where the students came from. But in general, I did get a lot of positive reaction. I enjoyed it. I have until spring to do my quizzes and be ready for it again. I am looking at doing a first semester course online in the fall, so I'm going to take these lessons learned and try to keep building with the community and our customers. That's good. Yes.
Because of the things you did describe, you mentioned that you tried to take something like
it mostly came into the comments tools. The blogs, I responded, at the first couple blogs, I responded to every single one. And I made sure that it was a comment that showed that student I had read what they said. That was very important. I didn't want anybody to feel like I was going to stop response. In the group work that they did in open spaces, that also had commenting tools, and I chimed in there. That was really where most of it was. And then just was playing feedback in there, assigning what they turned in. They honestly got much more feedback than any of my face-to-face classes ever had, which has been an interesting experience for me. I have a feeling from now on I'm probably going to have my face-to-face students that more through Sakai, but I just found it easier to give good, solid feedback versus when I write, I just don't write very well. I'm learning that my handwriting is illegible. So it's really been the feedback to the students and the comments tools. I did 3 or 4 videos throughout the semester. Not so that they weren't teaching a concept videos, they were more checking in, that kind of thing there. So those were what I used. Questions? Yes. Neo chat?
It's turned off by default.
Okay, I'm being told we don't have that.
I was just thinking, what are, we don't have it open for all the classes, but we open it as on a class-by-class basis if a curriculum requires it. When we use the Big Buttons meeting tool, there's a capstone business class that asks us to create meetings in groups to accommodate maybe 5 groups per class. And then they use that space as their online meeting space in between classes to work on things. And that just might be, I was just thinking if they miss that face-to-face piece, that's something to try.
Right. Yeah. And one of our other Spanish classes, I shouldn't discount what Jennifer's been doing. Our 4th semester class has gone online this year. And they have been using the Attendees tool or Big Button regularly, and then she's doing a lot of work with that. I think I would like to put in more verbal, giving them a chance to discuss verbally. The issue a little bit is even in groups, getting them together at the same time, just with our student population. It's a real issue. Community colleges are not on campus, they're out working for access.
But if they had a space, and they could maybe self-select, maybe you put it, I don't know, probably one or two, they could find, just if there's something that they could find a way to match up, and at least maybe most of them could get that. I know that's really bad.
One thing that I've talked to Becky about is using the sign-up in Sakai.
Oh, yeah.
As this is thinking more towards the fall, and I'm trying to do the first semester course, is using the sign-up tool to try to organize some of that so that we can get them together in that way. Yes. Well, thank you guys very much for coming.
And here I thought I knew everything about your course. I still learned enough.
So that was good.
Everything worked.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Are we supposed to turn that off? They're videotaping.
I think there's one more.
And so they just like keep going.
Okay. And then that's what the Pacific Northwest video.
What is it?
I use less than very little too long. So exactly, I'm a lot of the law for writing communication forms as I have these people on so that's what I want to do. But the recycling stuff is I got
What I did was, and you sort of that, so now mine.
Yeah.
420. We'll bring it down to scale from 410 to 420.
Oh.
So, what's the other one? Is it live? Yeah. Yeah, that's what we see. Should I stop? Broadcast? They're going to do the next class. They just leave it on for people that are watching.
She's good at video. Oh my gosh. And so this is and